Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Institute for Communication and Religions Conference on the intersection of faith, politics, and rhetoric in the 2020 U.S. presidential election. My name is John Radwin, and I'm honored to serve as ICR Director and your host today. We'll begin our event with an opening prayer from the Institute's founding director and former Chancellor of Seton Hall University, Monsignor Dennis Mann.
Thank you, John. We've come a long way. I was just chatting with John and Heidi earlier about how we've been so adaptable and switched from an in-place to an online event. And maybe we can recognize and appreciate that. Lord God Almighty, we humbly praise you, for you enlighten and inspire those who develop new works at new parts of the work of your hands in wonderful ways. Look with favor on your servants who use this new technology. Enable them to communicate truth, to foster love, to uphold justice and right. Let them promote and support that peace between peoples. May God, the creator of all things, who never ceases to work his wonders among us, enlighten our minds so that we may know him more deeply and strive always to spread his truth and his peace. Amen.
Thank you, Monsignor Mann. Sponsored by the Lilly Fellows Program, Seton Hall University is proud to present Communication and Religion in the 2020 U.S. presidential election, bringing together some of the foremost scholars in their fields to discuss and share their expertise with students, faculty, and the general public. Broadcast live to registrants across the country, our event will also be simulcast by Shemeru, a leading media and distribution company based in India. The views expressed at this conference are those of the participants. The university, qua university, neither endorses nor opposes any candidate or political party, but in the grand tradition of academic inquiry and freedom, brings you this conference, its scholars, and their views on what many have described as a critical juncture in both U.S. and world history. I'm now happy to introduce our first conference speaker, Professor Heidi Campbell of Texas A&M University. Dr. Campbell's research focuses on how religion is translated and transformed by digital cultures and the influence of digital and mobile technologies on Christian, Jewish, and Muslim communities. She is Professor of Communication, Affiliate Faculty in Religious Studies, and a Presidential Impact Fellow at Texas A&M University. She is Director of the Network for New Media, Religion, and Digital Culture Studies. She's also co-editor of Routledge's Studies in Religion and Digital Culture book series, and on the editorial board of the Journal of Computer-Mediated Communication, New Media in Society, the Journal of Media, Religion, and Digital Culture, and Ecclesiology and Ethnography. She has authored over 90 articles and books, and also edited 4 works, including Digital Religion, Understanding Religious Practice in New Media World from Routledge, and Playing with Religion in Video Games from the University of Indiana Press. Her work on digital religion has been widely quoted in national and international media outlets, including the Houston Chronicle, The Guardian, La Vanguardia, the LA Times, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and she has been interviewed by the CBC, BBC, Australian ABC Radio, and PBS. Dr. Campbell will be speaking with us today on internet memes and American civil religion for about 1 hour, and will be followed by about 15 minutes of Q&A with the audience. Please ask your questions via the chat feed, and by the end of today's event, please be sure to fill out the feedback form, also shared via the same Q&A chat feed. I now give you Dr. Heidi Campbell.
Thank you so much. It's really good to be here. I'm looking forward to sharing with you about my research. And this is an area that I often, politics isn't often an area I touch into, but in my study of religion and digital culture, it's taken me into many different new and unknown territories. And so I'm glad to be able to talk to you about that here. So. I'm hoping that you can see my screen. So 7 years ago is when I began my research studying internet memes. And many people have heard of them in the context of these kind of funny little pictures and videos that go around the internet. For the last 25 years, I've been studying the intersection between new media, religion, and digital culture. And so I'm really interested in not just how religious groups use digital technologies and respond to them, but also how digital spaces and environments frame and present ideas about religion. So initially I got interested in it because my students kept sending me these funny memes as parts of their paper, or just ones they would come across on religion. And I began to see that, while these memes are focused on, humor and entertainment, they have some very powerful messages in them. And also they kind of emulate the ethos of kind of what people's common ideas and values are in digital culture in many ways, which I'll talk about. So what are memes? Well, the concept of the meme was first developed by Richard Dawkins, and he used the word meme to talk about a unit of information or an idea that could be easily replicated and spread from source to source. He described genes or even viruses as an example of a meme, something that replicates and changes, and as it moves from host to host, as it were, it changes its form and its shape, but still carries that kind of imprint of the original. It's really interesting that he went on to kind of talk about how religion itself is a virus, and just how religion spreads to people. But using that term, religion as a virus, Dawkins kind of evokes a very negative view of religion, which we'll see kind of in some of these memes here, as well as in some of the. I think I'm going back. Limor Schiffman, who's one of the leading researchers in internet memes, she describes memes as like genes. Memes are defined as replicators that undergo variations, competition, selection, and retention. At any given moment, many memes are competing for the attention of their host. However, only memes suited to their social cultural environment spread successfully, while others become distinct. So memes have kind of filtered into the world of talking about education, talking about religion, and even talking about politics. And in the 2016 election, memes were often used, especially by kind of people online, to talk about maybe their favorite candidate or to critique others. But in the 2020 elections, we see that memes have moved into the mainstream sphere, and they're even being covered by the media. So in the last year, we've seen coverage of how memes are being used by different presidential and other candidates to kind of frame their message or to critique others. They have some people even have employed meme makers as part of their PR and campaign strategies. We also see that kind of media and memes kind of work back and forth. So kind of news media provides a lot of the kind of popular images that get used about political candidates, celebrities, and public people to talk about kind of different beliefs and ideas. This article from Wired magazine talks about the famous moment during the Trump speech, State of the Union in 2020, when Nancy Pelosi tore up his speech at the very end. And this image became a meme unto itself, used in positive and negative ways to kind of frame the speech and the events that followed. And more recently, this is an article that just appeared a week ago. It says, "They can't vote, but they can meme. How these TikTokers are trying to get Biden elected." So we see that young people, even though they can't participate in the vote, they are moving from just talking about politics in playful ways or in critical ways online to actually becoming part of the public sphere and using memes to communicate their concerns, their debates, and critiques of politics in the American landscape. So I want to introduce to you kind of there are different types of memes. Memes can be videos, they can be GIFs. That's an image that you might see on that has a kind of a video element to it. But what I focused on for this presentation and in my work are mostly internet memes that are image-based. So internet memes, as I define them, are visual and emotive forms of online communication, employing popular culture images with succinct messages to communicate common beliefs. And the study of memetics, especially internet memetics, has really burgeoned in the last a decade. Memes have been around for almost 20 years, but kind of recognizing them as kind of important storytellers about our ideas and beliefs and culture has really just been kind of emerging in the last decade. So, scholars have studied how memes kind of frame narratives, i.e. how they frame public opinion about certain people or certain events. Scholars have also described that memes are kind of a new form of visual digital language. They're a new genre that many people use, not just again for humor, but to communicate their beliefs or their ideals in certain situations. And in my own work, I've described how memes are these multi-layered storytellers, but they're constructed in such a way that it requires a level of complexity and understanding what a meme is, as well as the stories they're seeking to represent. So before I jump into kind of a little bit more of the presentation, I'm just putting this warning label out there that viewers may find some of these memes offensive or even heretical in religious terms. I try to be equally offensive to Protestants and Catholics, as well as the Democrats and Republicans, but because obviously Trump is in the presidency right now, some of the memes are more focused on him and different narratives. So I'm showing these for teaching purposes. It's not that I advocate these different political positions or that I agree with them. So just to kind of say that. But one of the complexities about internet memes is kind of we have to understand where they came from and how they work as a language. So I argue that memes about religion require a certain level of memetic literacy. You have to know kind of what are the meme characters that are prominent and dominant. So if you go to this website that we see on the right or left side of your screen, knowyourmeme.com, this is kind of the Wikipedia of memes. There's many dominant characters. We have Sean Bean saying, "Brace yourself." Winter is coming. This is coming from the Game of Thrones TV show. And so what you have to know the character, you have to know kind of their catchphrase, and you have to know kind of what is the emotion or story is being told in that original context, and then how the new topic or idea introduced changes it. So for example, we see that kind of someone adding some religious content here in the middle of about Pope Francis and brace yourself. Pope Francis is giving another interview, and the media are going to misinterpretation is coming. And so understanding what a meme is, what the meme characters are, and how meme work is important to be able to read and interpret these internet memes. But especially when you're doing memes about religion, you also need a degree of religious literacy. To some people, this is images of success kid, loses rib, gets a wife. Unless you know the biblical story of Genesis 1, you won't understand that this is kind of a play on the Adam kind of being feeling success because he got a partner out of the creation story. And so so there's this two levels of understanding, and as we add politics to the mix, there's a third level of literacy that's also needed. But one of the biggest challenges about memes is that memes essentialize religion, i.e. they are basically visual sound bites. They're trying to, in one picture and in very few words, communicate complex beliefs and positions and different views about people or storylines. For example, this is a character from the TV show How I Met Your Mother, and he has this famous catchphrase, "Challenge accepted," when someone tells him something hard to do, and he says, "I can do this." But reduce an entire religion to a single meme, challenge accepted. And this meme was created by one of my graduate students to really kind of sum up how religion, deals in catchphrases and tropes and in stereotypes, especially online, that we have to reduce our message to a few words. And so that means it is about smoothing over or eliminating all those complexities about a single debate. And so because of that, stereotypical images and assumptions get circulated, and it's a very broad language rather than very nuanced language in many respects. So this is true especially with kind of memes that deal with religion and politics. Duerringer did an interesting study during the last presidential election about Republican Jesus, who became a very prominent character in the last between 2015 and 16. He became a way both especially for people that were Democrats or kind of critical of Christians who are Republicans co-opting the party for their purposes to kind of critique, the representations. What would Jesus do? He would feed the sick, feed the hungry, care for the sick, shelter the homeless, and love everyone. But Republican Jesus would cut food stamps, got affordable health care, and so on and so on. So we see that kind of, a meme like this requires understanding of kind of American politics, American religion, and narratives, and also kind of where the humor or critique is lying in memes and meme discourse. So about 2 years ago, I came and I talked about, I did a presentation on my research on digital religion, but I had the chance to talk on a podcast about some of my early work on memes and religion. And what was interesting, in the first kind of 3 or 4 years of my research, I was looking at many different genres of internet memes, trying to identify what kind of, what the main genres and characters in religious meme discourse, how they were being talked about, and kind of what kind of ways they framed religion. And most of what I saw was very playful, very kind of, even tongue-in-cheek humor, and even the more kind of, mocking or negative tones were fewer and far between than the positive narratives. But I've seen a shift in the last 3 years, partially because of the topics I'm looking at, but partially because of the ethos we're living in, toward much more negative framings of religion, and especially when it comes to religion and politics. So originally, again, this initial work came out of trying to document what are the main genres of religious internet memes and how are they talked about. And in this work, which is collaborative with some of my graduate students, we were able to identify kind of 6 of main kind of frames that were used, and genres. So they're the most common genres. You see a lot of stock characters. These are internet stock characters like Matrix Morpheus, but there's also religious stock characters like what we see up in the right-hand side, Religion Pigeon. And we also see that these memes have another dominant narratives. So originally in my research, I found kind of playful memes or questioning memes being the most common. But what I've seen in the last couple of years, dealing with politics as well as dealing with kind of religious respect and tolerance, a lot more mocking memes, and I'll talk about that. But again, it's important to kind of be aware of like these, especially religious stock characters that are emerging. So one of my favorites is Storytime Jesus. We see this picture that you kind of think might have been pulled from, an old-fashioned or vintage children's Sunday school material, a picture of Jesus telling a story, but it's always about accompanied with a kind of idea that things that Jesus never said. So there I was, the only white guy in Jerusalem, and really trying to question maybe kind of the, where we see in the West as dominant Christianity is not the representative of religion in the world. But what we found in this early research is, again, memes were kind of more playful and questioning. Memes were really expressions of lived religion. They were kind of about either people both inside or outside of a religious community, but trying to kind of make sense of what the main markers or values were of a religious group. And they may say things critical, but they were more often in a questioning way. But like I said, in the last few years, I've been looking at what some have called the dark side of internet memes and the untruths that they speak. And that's what I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the idea of civil religion, because when we talk about religion and internet memes, it's not a religion as in a capital R, and it's not even religion in the broad sense. It's a particular type of religion that is being used and presented as the dominant frame and the dominant belief system of America and American religious people. And so starting with this research in 2016, I want to share some of the findings from that original study of memes around the 2016 presidential election, and then do a comparison about what is similar and what is different and how religion is being talked about through meme discourse. So in that original research, it started with 2 focuses. One was I wanted to look at the way religion and political messages circulate online, and also identify the themes with meme public discourse about religion and politics. So what are the main discussion factors? And just to go back, I want to give credit where credit's due. This work was done, and for this particular publication, was done with three of my students, Katie, Catherine, and Cody. And they've been great. My students have been great helping interpreting a lot of the popular culture images and figures that we run across in meme culture. But there's 2 key concepts that emerged when we began to look at kind of the 150 memes that we mapped and their themes, and we began to see that the religion that's represented in this discourse isn't the lived religion, which talks about how people interpret religion for their everyday lives in a very personal way. It was civil religion. And we see God talk, something that's talked about a lot in politics, being filtered in a very unique way. So first, let me kind of define these concepts because they're foundational in understanding some of the arguments I make. Robert Bellah, who's a sociologist of religion, is often credited as the person who's most kind of worked with and developed initially this concept of civil religion, and especially in the American context. He defines civil religion as related to the political society on the one hand and the private religious organization of the other. So it's looking at how do religion and politics intersect, and he sees in that intersection we get a version of religion that isn't a theologically based version. It's not even one based about a religious tradition, and it's not even associated solely with one group. We get this amalgamized, this essentialized view of religion that is very political and assumes religion is never apolitical. It's always politic driven. He argued that at its best, a genuine apprehension of universal and transcendent religious reality as seen in or revealed in the experience of American people, neither so general that is lacked incisive relevance to the American scene. So he's arguing that kind of, again, civil religion is infused not just with kind of American religious values, but American ideology. So it's based on a strong sense of nationalism and a strong sense of how religion can use symbols of kind of nationalist content in American history to kind of support itself, as well as how politics can rely on religion to help basically do some work in argumentation. So this kind of mixing of kind of religion and politics in kind of discourse is not a new phenomena. It's often been referred to, especially in rhetorical studies, as a study of God talk. So how do we talk about God, religion, and faith in the public sphere? But God talk is not just talking about God. It's God talk with a specific agenda to it. And Gaddy, who's done work in this area, has argued that God talk represents a technique that is used to marry religion and politics, but to justify this intersection and support. And he talks about in his work 2 different kind of strategies. One is the religification of politics, and the other is the politicization of religion. So in religification of politics, this is where a partisan group or certain position uses religion and religious rhetoric to achieve a sectarian agenda or desired political end. So i.e., maybe in a political speech you'd have somebody evoking a biblical story or biblical imagery to kind of explain their position or to encourage people to vote or support them. Politicization of religion is basically the exact opposite, that the political is seen as necessary outflow of specific religious beliefs or sets of values, and it's centered on the belief and claims that there's a logical relationship. In other words, it says that basically that religious belief, the political viewpoints are ingrained with religious values, and so different religious groups should support and advocate for certain political positions. So in the research, this initial research, it started out with 24 case studies of students of mine in my class, and then I worked with the students, Catherine, Katie, and Cody, to kind of enlarge that sample to 150 memes, specifically that had showed up and were created during the October-November time period in 2016. So in the first level, we were just trying to find, okay, what kind of memes are most prevalent and what kind of genre and what kind of frames are being used. So we found that most of the memes either had political figures that had a religious connection somehow, either that they were self-ascribed as religious or they were framed as religious in some way, or there were certain prominent religious stock characters, such as in the left-hand corner, Buddy Christ was a very popular image used during that election time period. And we found that basically many of these memes had a critical reaction to religious political themes and figures in this way. The dominant frame, or the way how was religion framed, it was primarily mocked. So we saw this moving from just playfulness or questioning to full-on mocking of religious political intersections, especially for those seeing that religion and politics going together. So the core findings of that study were kind of fourfold. We found that memes primarily address Christian conservative voters and openly Christian candidates. So the kind of characters we were seeing were, there was a lot of Trump, there was a lot of, for those in Texas, there was, pictures of, candidates running for, in the presidential candidates. A lot of kind of very prominent Christian candidates, as well as those that kind of would be identified with kind of a Christian right perspective. We found that in the memes, when religion was used to promote politics, i.e. we saw the religification of politics strategy, we saw that the main message is that religion and politics being together is contradictory, that it's about, there's something kind of, it's an impasse, it's a disconnect that should be happening, and people should see it that way. We found that when politics inform religion, it is seen as controversial. So emphasizing that, maybe that is a relationship that can be had, but it's always going to go in a negative frame. It's always going to be problematic. And one of the main messages we saw coming out of our study of these different memes was that true religion was framed as at odds with conservative political ideals. So one of the main narratives was of either people were using, putting up kind of Republican or conservative candidates and kind of critiquing or showing how their actions undermine their beliefs in some ways, or it was kind of putting up kind of more progressive or liberal candidates and showing how their view, their living out or connection with religion was more authentic or more more in tune with religious life and values. And a lot of this, the article we spent really focused on kind of the narratives around Trump. Of course, when we first did the research, we didn't know that Trump would win the presidency, but after that came about, it was helped us interpret some of the memes that we got. So most of the Trump memes were not just kind of pictures of Trump from news reports like we see in the upper right-hand corner, but it was a lot of what we call a pick and mix, or mixing Trump and his persona and face with images. We see, like at the bottom, we have a kind of picture of Storytime Jesus. He says, "Blessed are the poor," and we have Trump being saying "wrong," trying to critique the Republican, a critique of kind of helping the poor and immigrant communities. We also see that, overall the message that was said is that Trump had a religion, but it was a specific kind of religion, and it was a religion that was inauthentic and it was contradictory. This religification of politics was at work. So from these kind of, I'm trying to give you an overview of the studies. What I want to spend the last bit of my time is kind of talking about the key narratives that emerged in 2016 and the narratives that kind of still ring true, and also the unique narratives that emerged in 2016 versus 2020. So we found in the research, and I've gone back in the this last year, I spent a lot of time studying memes that emerged after the State of the Union in January, February, and then spent time in August and September looking at about 100 internet memes specifically about the presidential candidates, Biden and Trump, and how religion was framed around them. And what was interesting is that this kind of theme of civil religion, that religion that's being presented is not about Catholicism or Protestantism, even when they're talked about a reference. It's really talking about the civil religion that is a nationalized religion, that is a broad umbrella that is seen as representing all groups who would call themselves Christian, but really underneath it's presenting a very distinct picture of what Christianity is. So one of the general narratives that is maybe not surprising, that religion is but should not be political or politically aligned. This was very strong in 2016 and it's been echoed again, that religion and politics do mix, but they shouldn't. So, oh, you're tired of my anti-religious posts. Why don't you pray for me to stop? Or kind of more, negative or more kind of pointed ones about using images of American nationalism and religion and showing how this is kind of extremist ideology or portraying a view of religion that is inaccurate or biased. So religion is definitely political, and many memes even focus on trying to advocate like religion should be apolitical, but it's not. The second really dominant narrative that came out of the research was that religion, when people use the word religion in memes, they were basically talking about Christianity. If they were talking about Islam or they're talking about Buddhism or other religions, they always used that word, but religion was equal to Christianity. And the argument was that religion or Christianity justifies and accepts moral and ethical contradictions. So a lot of the memes use this character we see in the middle. This is Willy Wonka, Gene Wilder from the Willy Wonka from the 70s, but he's called Condescending Wonka. And his kind of, the idea, he uses this phrase from the movie, oh, so you say this, well, please tell me more. And to show kind of being condescending toward certain and undermining people's viewpoints. So you say that you're a Christian and that you're supporting Donald Trump. Please tell me more about how the two aren't contradictory. So this kind of meme shows that, that questioning this idea of religion and politics being associated with one another, because it basically presents Christianity as kind of being more influenced by politics than politics influencing religion. Also in, the use of kind of presidential candidates or other candidates and the framing of religion, we see that kind of, the use of Pence to say, that basically that religion is biased, religion is exclusivist, these very strong negative issues, and that it's that bias, exclusivism, and discrimination are basically acceptable within Christian communities or Christian discourse. I said, you see, it's not discrimination if you disguise it as using religion using religion as your basis. So this is another strong narrative. The third really common narrative kind of feeds on from the second, religion equals Christianity. And Christianity is Republican. So it kind of takes that narrative to a second level, saying not just when we see the word religion are we talking about Christianity, but we're talking about Christianity is always Republican. Christianity either supports, sides with, or can seen as compatible with Republican values, ideologies, and agendas. And the narrative here was a questioning of that, a strong critical questioning of that. We have Condescending Wonka again saying, so you're a Republican who worships Jesus. Please tell me more about how the plan to cut programs and feed the hungry and heal the sick. So she's kind of highlighting that, well, this is kind of what you stand for, but this is kind of a narrative that seems kind of contradictory again. On the left-hand side, we see Republicans will overrule Roe v. Wade. And then we have the girl saying, not if they want to keep their most loyal supporters. So in other words, that basically Republicans are supporting a very conservative agenda, but that actually is problematic in the long run. And then from these three narratives, in 2016, we saw two other narratives kind of merging that we didn't see so much in this election. In 2016, because of the Obama presidency and because of some of the positions kept by Hillary Rodham Clinton, we saw a lot of Islam kind of entered into the public debate around the election time. And it was framed that true American Christianity is anti-Islamic. So if a person basically encourages or supports a Muslim community or a Muslim country, then they were shown to be, there's no way that they could be Christian and there's no way that they could be American. So the idea, and I'm often using the people that were kind of more supportive of Muslim communities, immigrants and whatnot, as examples of this. So never kind of showing the other side where a conservative was standing up and saying this, but more so using the kind of the progressive or democratic perspective to show that and really saying that they really can't be Christians because of this belief. Another strong narrative we saw in 2016, which we also see a little bit in 2020, is the figure of Jesus. So we saw Buddy Christ, as we see in the middle, or kind of versions of storytime Jesus showing up again and again, but often using Jesus in a way to highlight these inconsistencies. So what we primarily see is these images being used to kind of challenge a Republican standpoint or conservative viewpoint in many respects, showing kind of, Jesus was saying something, but he was questioning something that the conservative viewpoint was advocating in policy issues and showing how it was inconsistent with him or religious values. we can't feed all these people. That would create dependency, and trying to kind of show reference a perceived political outcome of Republican practices. We also saw more playful, and it was one of my favorite ones about Bernie Sanders, that you've been worshiping a socialist Jew for years, time to vote for Bernie Sanders. And the idea that, like, well, you shouldn't see as voting for a Jew as inconsistent with your faith, even though you do, because, hey, so Jesus was also Jewish. So using that as a narrative. So in the 2020, again, the data that I worked with was about 200 memes coming from the State of the Union address and just the last 2 months. Most of these memes, especially for the last 2 months, were focused primarily on Trump and Biden. I can talk more about in the question period where the methodology of how I got to these memes. But we see kind of in several different kind of narratives being echoed again and again, and some new ones. First is that religion presented in memes still promotes a form of civil religion. So when they're talking about religion, they're not talking about the kind of religion that people would get in religious education or Sunday school. They're not talking about the form of religion that we find in religious studies textbooks, where we find a religion that is basically assumes that it's political, assumes that it has a nationalist agenda, and assumes that it's affiliated with a conservative ideology. What we see more strongly, though, is especially in the images and the narratives that religion, which is Christianity, which unspoken, it's Christianity, directly implicitly references white evangelicals. So what does it mean to be Christian? It means to be white, middle class, and an evangelical. And so is the assumption that, kind of wiping out, part of, the Christian community who doesn't hold to a white, to evangelical viewpoints, and even overlooking Catholics. In fact, Catholics often get conflated with evangelicals in many of these memes. And I think, one of this kind of this sums up for me kind of these assumptions is this meme we had a picture of him with the president and his wife of Liberty University. And it says, shows this contradiction of a Christian leader. And then we see in the background a picture of him on, Playboy magazine. And to show this kind of contradiction of how religious groups have affiliated themselves with politics, and to the point where they've overlooked kind of even what their religion stands for. Two new narratives emerged in this last year. One is the narrative in 2020 that Biden is either good or a bad Catholic, and we found kind of almost equal amount of memes kind of talking about Biden being a Catholic and how he was a good representative of the Catholic Church, as well as others saying that he wasn't, because especially of his stance on abortion and his stance on the Vatican's affiliation with certain kind of beliefs and whatnot. So Biden's a good or bad Catholic, depending on what set of memes that you're looking at. And the other narrative echoes a bit of what we saw in 2016 about Trump being inconsistent, but what we see is an interesting affiliation of Trump and his Jesus. So we see Jesus showing up in a lot of memes, and this image in the top where we see kind of Jesus in the background kind of surrounding Trump and helping him write out a law or sign a policy. This kind of imagery is very, very frequent, but it often gets framed in terms of that, this is Trump's Jesus, but Jesus isn't representative of Trump, i.e. it's in some ways kind of trying to critique this civil religion, a nationalist view of Christianity and faith that has just been kind of gone accepted, or that's being promoted through these memes. And again, also is representing his Jesus, but also as in some cases true Christianity is but in many of them that represents fake Christianity. So, like example, this image of Franklin Graham has been used in a lot of memes, especially to critique Trump. This one says, "If your church preaches that Donald Trump is chosen by God, we strongly recommend you find another church." Well, I'm pretty much out of time. So, just in order to sum up. What we find is that, when religion gets talked about online, oftentimes it's not the religion we think about. Again, in the term of here, we see it's a civil religion that focuses on the contradictory nature of religion and politics, that is using God talk to engage the political, but for dodgy ends in many perspectives. Things that would be heretical or unethical, or at least problematic in many respects. And so what are the implications of this? Well, I believe that paying attention to religion memes is important because, again, people create memes that to try to say an important belief or message in a very short hand. So by paying attention to the most popular memes, most frequently circulated, we can often begin to tell how people see religion outside of traditional religious contexts. And that we see here, that's very true in these election memes. But we also find religious political memes speak the language of civil religion, and that religion is that Christianity is white, Republican, and aligned with the powers for moral benefits. And that religion enacting memes is not apolitical, but it's used to either praise or rebuking this new civil religion. So with that said, I think I'm going to wrap up there. I'm sure I'm giving you a lot of food for thought and things to debate. So I will turn it over to question and answer about my research or just some of the observations we're seeing about how memes talk about religion and politics in this current election period.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Campbell. I'd like to invite everyone now to use the live event Q&A chat feed to share your questions with Dr. Campbell. And to get us started, while you type those in, I'd like to ask a question of Dr. Campbell. First, thank you so much for sharing. And you're a friend of the Institute for Communication and Religion. You were one of our speakers back in 2019, and it's wonderful to have you back here today. Your presentation was super interesting, and for your focal point, you picked a particular type of internet communication, memes. What else should scholars of communication, politics, and religion be paying attention to beyond memes? Like those are condensed forms, as you described, that can adapt and grow as they fit in with their host culture. Is the blog irrelevant in today's day and age? Are we all focused just on condensed mockery and jokes? What are your thoughts about other forms of internet communication in the 2020 presidential election, especially as it bears on communication and religion?
Dr. Campbell, you're muted. I'm sorry.
I think, talking about memes is important because it's not just the images. It refers to, kind of video memes. There's lots of people create spoofs of kind of campaign ads and whatnot. Even kind of our counter campaign ads to different things. I think especially in digital discourse, memes are the language of especially millennials and Generation Z, because they can so easily be created. And there's something about humor, whether it's a meme or whether it's just creating kind of a TikTok video where they're trying to pretend to be a political candidate. Humor is meant to basically disarm us. It's kind of like the jester in the king's court. We're being entertained. We don't realize that there's a pointed message being come in. And so I think, especially if we often think about, okay, if we want to study the public sphere, let's look at the editorials. Let's look at let's look at the news coverage. But those, that's by the media industry, and there's kind of a barrier of entry for some people into that discourse. I think things like memes, TikTok videos, social media, and the many kind of digital content, they basically kind of give us the consciousness or the temperature of the country, and kind of Joe average or Jane average. And I think that's important. I think the other problem, I think blogs are good because they are this digital space and people can put them out. And I think in the 2016 and 12 elections, they were really important for people kind of being able to give alternative readings of events or candidates' positions. But there's so many so many politicians that hire bloggers or basically give them a stipend to basically blog pro messages. And so it's really hard to kind of trace, is this actually the person's position, or are they just basically promoting, advertising for that. And then, even many well-known bloggers will take money to, write ads or create content that promotes certain candidates or critiques others. So I think in some ways, it's become a little polluted depending on the source.
Okay, thank you so much for that answer. I see questions coming into the chat feed now. Just so everybody knows how it works, Please type your questions. I will read it out loud, and then I'll also publish it so everyone can see it in writing. So this first question comes from an anonymous viewer. This person asks, do you see memes as an outlet for people to voice their political grievances and engage in outspokenness in regard to political figures?
I would definitely say that that is a whole genre unto itself, that there is a lot of people that use this as a way to kind of critique or challenge. And that is either to challenge people in their own party or in other political parties, or even just to kind of make people look, kind of, especially to show contradiction, to show, kind of make fun of kind of inconsistencies. Sometimes people will think, well, they're making this person look bad, but it's one thing to deliberately make people look bad. It's another thing if actually you're just showing kind of the inconsistencies of position. But I think, within the political realm, kind of negative mocking is kind of the dominant genre and dominant discourse strategy used, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Our next question comes from another anonymous poster. This person asks, what was the method that you used to code or determine which memes you would use in your analysis? That's
a good question. So in the original study, we did a series of 24 case studies where I had my students go out and basically either look at one specific, like a Facebook group or a Twitter stream, looking at kind of what are the memes that are being talked about in those dominant spaces. And we then identified kind of who were the dominant political figures that were being talked about and from the analysis, and then what was the kind of either religious characters or just meme characters that were used. And then we went in the second phase and looked for those specific things. We did a combination of Google searches, image-based searches, as well as kind of correlating our work with kind of basically people that were writing about memes and politics online. So it's hard to kind of say, like, was it fully representative? We wouldn't go that far, but we would say that it basically is a distinct picture of people within the certain kind of genre. And we could definitely say, just statistically, that there was the mocking frame was the dominant one used.
Okay, thank you for sharing your research methods. This next question comes from Elaine Schnabel. She asked, where were you sourcing these memes from? How did you decide which sources the memes, and did you track which platforms had which memes? And then relatedly, have you tracked any connections with the rise of QAnon?
A good question. So when we were looking for the sources of the memes, again, we started out with kind of trying to identify where are the main kind of discourse communities that we're talking about with different political candidates, and we tried to kind of be equal with looking at Republican focus versus Democrat focus versus kind of maybe those focused on maybe a specific, especially thing like immigration. So we used kind of looking at the memes that showed up there, and then we did Google searches to double check, saying, okay, we see these as the most dominant characters. Okay, so if we do this search like 3 different times during a day, are they the characters that are showing up most consistently? Like, so we'd look at the first 100 memes on several times a day and then count how many of what character was showing up, and then we were able to kind of make a connection. There are some tracking softwares that you use, but we were trying to again just do a thematic approach and more of a kind of a cross section, give a cross section rather than being representative. And about the QAnon, that would be a great area. I'm actually trying to finish a book on religious diversity and tolerance and internet memes, so I haven't been able to get into the QAnon, but it's on my list of things to get to. And if anyone is doing work on that and would like to collaborate, or I would love to hear what you're learning from that.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Campbell. Our next question comes from Cynthia Moll. She asks, what age group is most affected by memes? Is this group more or less influential on political outcomes? If they are targeted at a demographic that is less likely to vote, what purpose do they serve?
That's a good question. So I would say that, most of the people that, obviously the younger generations are, Generation Z and millennials are most likely to be the producers. You know, the upper end of Generation Z are 23 right now, so they are in that kind of, you know, first wave of kind of able to vote. This might be the first election they're able to vote in, and so so even though memes range younger, a lot of people are finding that they're effective, and so much so that, again, a lot of political candidates hire people to create memes, whether they're video memes or image-based memes, to influence opinion and especially to degrade their opponents. So I think that says something that, you know, while it's definitely seems more young people oriented, that these images can be very poignant and make a impact. And if they hit a heart chord, they easily become viral and spreadable online.
Thank you again, Dr. Campbell. I have a few more questions in the feed, but we do have more time, so I encourage other people to post them. I'm going to pause a minute for one of my questions. If you were a political campaign consultant for the two candidates that we're voting for from our major parties, what advice do you give each of them? Like you mentioned before, hiring bloggers. Would you say you should hire a memer, or would you say attempt to ignore them? What type of advice do you have for our current candidates and meme culture?
I mean, well, I think memes can be very effective, you know, and they don't have to be negative or lambasting the other side. They can be used ways just to promote, you know, your beliefs or policies. I think, you know, Bernie Sanders had this whole tribe of people, and it was written about oftentimes of that were people creating memes, and like they were trying to use that to kind of give a pro Bernie kind of message on the internet. I know, especially. So I think that, you know, it's like, you know, these things are already being done. That, you know, there's already people that, you know, hire bloggers, that they track Twitter, and then they you know, monitor and so what kind of messages do we need to send, who do we need to be responding to, etc. So there's a lot of statistical big data going into elections, and a lot of social media production that is important, because people are finding that, you know, the people don't watch television as much anymore. It's the older generation. Of course, those have a stronger percentage of voting, but, you know, as we've seen in this current election, that a lot of young people are getting out and voting, and that it's motivating people. And so that I think, you know, looking at non-traditional routes. And there's something also kind of authentic about, you know, maybe a person creating a meme and then it going viral versus, you know, a campaign. There's something about, you know, kind of people identify with kind of these kind of this bootstrapping or kind of more grassroots kind of promotion of candidates. And so I think, you know, kind of not maybe it's not so much hiring someone, but also kind of you know, empowering your supporters as well.
Okay, very interesting. Our next question is another one from Elaine Schnabel. It's another very good one. I'm struck by the idealization of supposed true or authentic religion in much of these memes. The promise of a good religion for feeding the hungry and caring for the sick. What are the positive political impacts you see of religious memes?
Well, I think one of the things that we see, is that, you know, kind of highlighting, especially in these kind of spaces of contradiction, saying, okay, this is what Jesus stood for, this is what this political candidate or other political candidate stands for. It's kind of trying to show that, you know, we often, politics, especially in religion, often gets limited to several key issues. You know, it's about kind of maybe it being issues of the economy and poverty, it's about abortion, and it's about, you know, LGBT issues. And these memes kind of begin to highlight some of the broader issues and bring them to the fore, and saying, hey, we need to have conversations about, you know, issues of you know, immigration, issues of kind of social programs. And I think a lot of, again, there's critiques of this growing socialism in our country, but, you know, a lot of these socialist principles actually have very strong religious roots, and so I think that's a very important thing to say. Like, if you're going to be anti-socialism, then you're a lot of anti-Jesus's policies. So how do we kind of maybe align what we see as political and what we see as maybe a religious tradition, agendas or concepts that maybe just aren't in the fore of our discourse, but maybe should be? So that's what I would say.
Great, thank you. And our next question comes from Mark. Mark asks, did your research provide any insights into whether these religious political memes are persuasive in changing opinions, or are they more about reinforcing existing opinions and beliefs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, and like, our research focuses, and my research has focused on mostly content analysis of memes. You'd have to kind of go into like the platforms and really kind of track what the people are saying, or do kind of focus groups with the memes. And I think that's important. But again, in many respects, these memes seem to be kind of creating an echo chamber, i.e., this is what I believe, whether I believe it in a playful way or in a very strong way. It's kind of promoting people's kind of beliefs, and then it's just kind of oh yeah, I passed that meme on. I mean that because I believe that too. Could memes be a persuasive thing? I really hope they can. And I talk a lot about my classes of how you can use memes to give counter narratives about religion, and especially empowering religious people to say, hey, if you are coming from a Catholic background, what are the key values that represent you, and how could you use memes to communicate that narrative? We see this a lot within a lot of Islamic groups of young people online trying to use memes as a counter narrative or an alternative narrative for their religious group and religious identity. And so I think that there is a persuasive element. I just haven't done that work, but it would be a good project for someone who wants to take that on.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. I think I really have to agree on that one. It's yes, of course they reinforce, but I really think that especially with religious issues, there's a fair amount of ignorance among young people. And it's possible that a little bit of wisdom might get through a meme and help someone learn and maybe even change their mind.
And I just to respond, I think that's really important because these images that people are presenting of religion are basically, they're kind of gleaned from popular media, whether it's digital media or most people don't learn about religion by going to the religious community. They get it from secondary sources, and so this is why we see kind of this kind of a warped or inaccurate view of religion through memes, because it's kind of the narrative about religion and politics being this problematic narrative, and so that it starts out with a negative view of religion versus actually kind of digging into what religion is.
Very well said. Let's move on to Maureen's question. Maureen asks, could it be that some generations rely too much on memes to get a sense of what each party stands for, resulting in quite a superficial or distorted understanding of the real issues at stake? How can we encourage the younger generations to enter into more meaningful exploration and analysis of the policies and issues involved, so as to better equip them not to be too gullible to the emotionally charged propaganda?
Actually, with my students, I mean, I haven't seen that. I mean, I'm impressed with how my students are politically aware or aware about the issues and the discourses. I think because a lot of them in high school or in college are getting a lot more opportunities to talk and study about them themselves. I think I think the key thing is just encouraging people to read multiple sources. If you're only getting your views about politics from the internet memes, that's obviously biased. But if you're only getting it through the nightly news, you're also biased unless you're watching 6 or more from very different perspectives shows. I think that this isn't a generational issue. It's a kind of a media literacy issue of understanding that are you looking at not just the topics but the outlets? Do you understand kind of the political agendas of different news sources, as well as bloggers, as well as people in social media? And so I'm realizing that as a former journalist, I loved how the National Press Building in DC, it talked about being having this open perspective and being kind of unbiased, and unbiased is a myth. Anyone will tell you. We can attempt to be have a broad perspective, but we all have our passions and our values that are going to filter what we see. And the only way to get that more diverse is to diversify the sources and have open mind for the arguments that they present.
Excellent, thank you. Our next question comes from an anonymous viewer. The president has been using memes and videos to troll Biden and other opponents. Do you think political figures should use memes on their digital platforms? And what distinguishes positive and negative uses of memes?
Well, I think one thing is, because like certain debates, like I said, when we're talking about the economy, we're talking about education, we're talking about like the future of Social Security. These are really complex issues. But because memes, if you have an evocative image and a cool soundbite or quote, you can basically present your agenda. I have my students do this in classes where they take a media theory and they have to create a meme that sums up the argument of that theory. I mean, so why would you could hire someone not to create memes that you're critiquing the other guy or woman or trying to make yourself look good, but actually kind of present your policies. Here is in one meme, and a soundbite. This is what I stand for. I think that there's lots of positive ways, but the problem is probably most of these memes are being created by people outside the campaign and not with the same agenda.
Okay, great, thank you. And now we have an excellent question from an anonymous viewer. What do you think are the implications for religious minorities and atheists?
That's a great question. And that's actually kind of at the heart of my new book. It's called When Memes Are Mean. And looking at kind of what images do we get of religion, especially religious minority groups in the U.S. So looking at kind of, again, Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu communities and how they are framed. And I think that the implication is that, again, a lot of people, how did they find out about religion? Well, it was through Sunday school, it was through religious education, it was through maybe journeying and visiting, different communities or the education their parents gave them. None of that is happening today. So how do young people get ideas? Well, unless they actually meet someone from another faith or some minority culture, it's from the media messages around them. And again, these memes pretty much circulate the dominant stereotypes or assumptions people have. One of the things I found in my book is that, the three main stereotypes you get of Jewish memes are the three stereotypes that were happening in Shakespeare's day. If you look at his depiction of Shylock in The Merchant of Venice, so that, stereotypes, circulate on and on again. Digital media isn't creating anything new. It's just reinforcing bias that's already there. So the important thing is kind of, again, empowering people to offer alternative narratives and also teaching people how to be critical readers of the content, whether it be a meme, a Twitter post, or a blog post online.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. Our next question is another one from Elaine, and yes, we do have time. We're going to 4:45 today, so we're doing fine on time. She asks, there are rational critiques involved in memes, but in terms of persuasion, there's also a lot of emotional assumptions and affect sharing in memes. Would you speak a bit more about the role of emotion or affect in meme culture?
Yes, I mean, the idea, the emotive, that memes are about making an impression and evoking a reaction. But this is also what think of memes are in the same genre of political cartoons or political ads. They're about kind of evoking a certain kind of feeling. And I think, why they resonate so much with millennials and Generation Z is that there's been a real turn between kind of, the boomers, and it happened in my generation, Generation X, where instead of kind of rationality and logic being the basis for how we make arguments and how we show evidence, experience and personal experience trumps, logic or facts. And so, because it's kind of playing and it evokes that kind of connection first, well, if I feel that connection, then that's real. So we need to realize that, yeah, they work, and yeah, that's problematic, but that's the reality we live in. And that's, again, why I think these memes require a digital literacy as well as a religious and political literacy to show how they work and show how, when you work on an experiential based logic or response, this is the journey where it leads you on versus a logic. I know logic may be too kind of rational and too cold-hearted, but we kind of restrain the other side now.
Thank you, Dr. Campbell. I'm not seeing any other questions come up right now, but I do need to ask everyone in our remaining time to please visit the Q&A feed right at the beginning. We posted a link to the feedback form, and if you've ever run an event like this, trust me, feedback is super important. So I'd like to encourage everybody who's online right now to please follow the link in the Q&A chat feed to share your feedback. And while you do that, we can also move on to Zach's question. So let me paste this first. There we go. And then Zach has a question. Zach says, as a graduate student who's interested in communication theory, what communication theories do you see as applicable in the study of memes?
Well, I think, I see, a lot of cultivation, obviously, the idea that, kind of memes could cultivate certain viewpoints because, again, they echo and reaffirm the same beliefs. There's a nice genre in these examples of kind of questioning memes, of their kind of pushing, but questioning is usually not as common as kind of playful or mocking memes. And so, kind of it's basically kind of creates an echo chamber. You share the memes that you're interested in, and then your friends share those same memes, and on and on and on. That actually creating diversity is something that you have to kind of program into digital culture. So I think cultivation would be one of them. Obviously, there's two theories in digital media theory: network publics. And convergence theory. Convergence theory is coming from Henry Jenkins, and he describes that basically the internet has created this ideal space for collaboration or participatory culture, encouraging people to create shared discourses. And that's what memes do. That's why a meme, whether a meme survives or dies, depend on, can you identify the character and can you connect with what they're saying? So I think that one, and as well also network publics, and it's a concept about, kind of going to Habermas's idea of the public sphere and to what extent the internet does that. And I think that's a great one to apply for questioning the effect, especially of religious political memes. Are they creating the public sphere a space of discourse where the best ideas rise to the top, or is it just the most entertaining ideas and with the best kind of celebrities or icons that rise to the top? So I think those would be three that I would use to look at these issues.
That's wonderful, and especially as someone who teaches communication theory, I'm excited that Zach is interested in learning more about communication theory, and using it to study online communication is, of course, very needed. And so right now, I'm inviting everyone to stick around for the rest of the week. This is only the first event that we have for our conference on communication and religion in the 2020 election. And so all of you, or most of you, should have registered. And I'm sorry the format didn't come out so clean in the chat feed, but tomorrow is a very busy day. So at 2 o'clock, we have Dr. Ron Arnett from Duquesne University, and he is speaking on Practices That Matter, the Faith and Politics of Dorothy Day. And especially looking forward to that one. Dorothy Day was a Catholic activist in the late 20th century, and I'm proud to teach her book, Loaves and Fishes, in our core curriculum, and I really hope a lot of people will tune in to learn about Dorothy Day's faith and politics. Then at 3:30, we'll hear from Dr. Robert Polito. He's a political scientist who works right here at Seton Hall University. He's the former chair of the department, and he will be speaking on Trump, the 2020 election, and the limits of ideology theory. And so maybe to tie a little bit to Zach's question about communication theory, communication theory and political science and theory from that sister discipline, I find frequently intersect. And so I'm looking forward to Dr. Polito's talk. Then at 5 o'clock tomorrow, we have Dr. Formicola, and she's speaking to us about Catholics, the media, and the 2020 presidential election. And this will be an especially interesting talk because, as we heard from Dr. Campbell, the mainstream, and really even to the level of just equating religion with Christianity, is a common narrative that we see in our country nowadays in our public discourse. And lumping Catholics together with evangelicals and other Protestant traditions is sometimes accurate and other times less accurate. And so if we visit tomorrow at 5 o'clock, we'll hear from Dr. Formicola on how to unpack that conundrum. Then, for the first time, I think ever, we're hosting a presidential debate watch party, first time ever at Seton Hall University. And so this will be interesting not only from a technical standpoint, but also from a content standpoint. If anybody watched the first presidential debate, tomorrow's debate promises to be exciting. And the broadcast starts at 9 o'clock, but we'll start off at 8:50 to explain everything to everyone. And so our host is Professor Kathy Zizik. She's the director for our Brownson speech and debate team here at Seton Hall University. So she's very expert on debating, and she'll give a brief introduction. And then we'll also introduce our bingo game. And so we can't take credit for inventing the bingo game. We learned about it from the University of Utah. But basically what we've done is we've taken bingo cards and taken off the numbers and replaced the numbers with political issues that the candidates are likely to discuss, such as COVID-19 or the economy or religion. And then we scrambled them all. And so if you would like to watch with us, you'll get a bingo card at the beginning. And then as the candidate says the issue, so like when they're talking about COVID-19, which I think is likely to be first, you click that off on your bingo card. And when you get a full row, you post a picture of your card into the chat feed, and I'll get your address and send you a gift card to the bookstore. So there's a nice incentive to watch the debate and become more informed on our election as we come up to the decision date. So that's the long day on Thursday. On Friday, we're ending out the week with a more dialogic presentation. So Professor Peter Beinart is a journalism faculty member at the City University of New York. He's also the newest op-ed writer for the New York Times. So he's a very successful person who's been studying communication and religion for quite some time. He has several books out. He requested a dialogue, and so I'm going to dialogue with him, and our host is McKenna Schrey. We're going to dialogue, we could talk a lot of things about religion in this election. We're going to try to focus in on Judaism and Christianity. And in addition to the live Q&A chat feed, you all might have noticed, and many of you did because I have the data, that we asked for a question when you registered. And so we'll answer select questions on Judaism and Christianity in the election from the registration, and that will round out our conference. Again, that's October 23rd, Friday, and that starts at 12:30. So I'm seeing one more new question from Cynthia. Cynthia asks, will these sessions be recorded and available to view later? And I'm happy to say that yes, we are recording right now, Cynthia. And we will post them on the Institute for Communication and Religion website at shu.edu. And we have everybody's email address from the registration, so we'll send everybody a message pointing you to that site. This is bringing us to the end of our talk today. It's been a long time coming. Some of you know that we had originally planned this conference for April, and COVID got in the way, so we replanned it for an online presentation. We're especially thankful to Dr. Campbell for adapting to us and speaking to us online and sharing her research on internet memes and American civil religion. I want to thank everybody for your time and attention today, and I'm going to make one more plea. Please don't forget to fill out the feedback form that I linked in the chat feed. We really need your insight so that we can make future events even stronger. So once again, my name is John Radwin. I'm honored to direct the Institute for Communication and Religion, and I'm especially thankful to the Lilly Fellows Program for funding this conference. And I'd like to wish you all a wonderful day, and I hope to see you all tomorrow and Friday. Goodbye, everybody.